Good morning, Year 12. Welcome to our next lesson along on biodiversity. This follows straight on from taxonomy and classification work that you've already completed and the courtship behaviour lesson that we did earlier on in the week. Thank you so much for all the work you've submitted so far. I think you're doing really great and the work you're submitting is really good quality. Thank you. Today's lesson on biodiversity is looking at why biodiversity is important, largely from a human perspective, as often that's what we do with this kind of biology, and how we measure species diversity. So, first of all, what I want to look at for you is key definitions. So in the study of the living world in particular, you really need to be confident about definitions of keywords. Now, I know I always say this and it's always true, but in order to use them accurately, you've got to understand what the words mean. And sometimes just out in normal language, in layman's language, we misuse scientific words like the word accurately itself. So the first thing I want you to do before we really get stuck in is to look at the biological definitions for these following words, please. Please write your own definition down. So just once I've put the words up, just pause for a few minutes whilst you get that done and then rejoin as soon as you're ready. So the words I'm looking for are these: population, community, habitat, niche, gene pool, ecosystem, and then biodiversity itself. Okay, so just pause now. Excellent, thank you. So, what is biodiversity? Well, in simple terms, it's the number and variety of living organisms that you will find in a particular area. Now, that's important, that idea of a particular area, because we can measure biodiversity over very, very small areas. So, for example, I don't know, a microbiome would be something like the plug hole in your sink, for example, all the way up to your garden, to a school area like the school field, Warsaw itself, to the UK, and then all the way to the Earth itself. Whichever kind of area we're looking at, we can consider that biodiversity is composed of three different parts. So the first one is the species diversity that's within a community. The second one is genetic diversity in a population. So that's the number of genes that are available within individuals in a particular population. So that's just for one species. And ecosystem diversity. So the different range of habitats that might be available within the area that you are looking at, within the ecosystem you're looking at. So again, if you're looking at a really small area, you're not going to have a large range of habitats. But if you're looking at the UK as a whole, there's going to be quite a diverse number, quite a large range of habitats. And again, if you then move to the Earth as a whole, much, much more range in possible ecosystems there. Again, I'd just like you to pause just for a few minutes and write your definitions for what those three terms mean, so that you can remember that those three elements do go into the overall idea of biodiversity itself. Okay, all done. Thank you. So species diversity is the one that we really want to look at today. One way of measuring species diversity is to look at what we call the richness of a species in a particular area at any given time. Now, what this means is the number of different species in a given area, but also the number of individuals within each species in that community that's in that given area. Now, remember, a community is the total number of populations of animals, plants, bacteria, whatever's there in a given area. So, well, why is biodiversity important, and why might we want to look at species richness? If we just consider this simple food web, it hopefully will bring your mind back to thinking about some of the interdependence and interactions between different levels of organisms in food chains and food webs, and also the impact that they will then have on their environments, such as, for example, soil formation or decomposition of dead organic matter, gases that might be cycled through the air, nutrient cycles, all of those all link together due to these feeding relationships and interdependence. So why it's important? Simply, just stability kind of sums it all up, really. And what I mean by this is that the higher the species diversity, the more likely it is that an ecosystem is stable. What that means is it can withstand change. So because there's enough range and variation in the organisms, in each individual species as well, to withstand selective pressures. So again, this links back to our last topics about different kinds of selection and the impact that can have on a particular species. If there is a different selective change, such as a gradual climate change, for example, there will be changes over time that might affect the stability of that ecosystem. If there's a one-off or two or three events that could be a little bit catastrophic, like droughts or severe weather events, then, some species can be wiped out, or a large number of species can be wiped out. So the more variety you have, the bigger the range, the easier it is for that ecosystem to absorb the changes and for the remaining members of the community to still be able to survive and function as a stable system. A narrower diversity can lead to devastation of the ecosystem. That means if some populations are wiped out, there's likely to be a bigger knock-on effect on other populations. So the loss of one species might severely impact the food chain for other species, in a way that it wouldn't when they'd got alternative food sources, as they would have in a higher biodiversity ecosystem. So what I'd like you to have a little think about for a moment is, can you suggest some benefits to us, to animals in general and plants in general, yes, but also to the human population? Why is it of benefit for us to really think about high biodiversity? Why is it important for us, for ecosystems to be stable? What ways do we benefit from that? So just pause for a moment, have a little think. If you can see, you can think of some different ideas. If you are struggling a little bit to think of some ideas of your own, there are a number of images on the next slides that will help you to get your thoughts going. Okay, so let's have a little look at some of these images. Hopefully you've got some of these. We've got at the top here the idea of timber for building and for, I don't know, in the old days, railways, all sorts of things like that. Medicines, food sources, there's makeup and things like that. Makeup seems a bit of a strange one, but the cosmetic industry is huge, and it isn't just cosmetics. If you think of things like that, it'll be things like washing powders, soaps, just ways we keep personal hygiene, that kind of thing. All sorts of things there. And again, on this side, just more for nature, pollination, this one here, nutrient cycling, I think I already mentioned that one. Seed dispersal, this is a carrion bird, so one that's helping to get rid of dead organic matter, dead and decaying bodies that are left around. Same there with your dung beetle. We've got soil here that's perhaps undergone some soil erosion. You've got the plants there that are helping to keep that all together. The bigger the biodiversity, the better these processes work. So hopefully you've got some ideas of your own from that as well, and add some more from there to it if you weren't quite sure. The key thing here, this is a little bit off topic, but I think it's important that we bring it all together, and we should never forget that we don't exist alone, human race. So whilst we don't always feel like it, we're very much reliant on the ecosystems around us for our survival. I think it's very debatable right now whether or not humans are a fully functioning part of food webs that we belong to. We still belong to them, but we exploit the environment around us in a way that no species has ever done. And our population is so huge now that I don't think it's always possible to understand our impact on the ecosystems that we interact with. But it's so important to remember we can't carry out the ecological processes ourselves that all of those organisms are doing for us. we can't do the seed dispersal, we can't do the pollination, we can't do the decay and decomposition of organic matter. So we sometimes harness those and try to control them, but we still rely on the nature and the abilities of other organisms to do that. A good example of how we are sort of exploiting this kind of thing is this idea of biodomes. There's millions and millions of pounds have been put into a variety of biodomes around the world where you've got these enclosed areas where they are unnatural habitats for that particular area. So perhaps recreation of a rainforest or, particular desert areas, things like that. I find this photo quite interesting, actually, that we've got this wonderful biodome with all sorts of different species in there alongside that huge, monstrous network of roads. But anyway, the other one that is quite common that people look at is this idea of creating biodomes that would allow us to live elsewhere. So like somewhere on Mars. So you've got the contrast there between, well, let's see what's working. Let's try to understand it, conserve it, make it work for us. And well, actually, let's make it work for it in a different way. Let's go live on Mars and do what we can up there when the Earth is no longer a viable place for us. So I don't know. There's no right or wrong with that. It's interesting to think about, and you've all got your own opinions on that. It could simply just be that living on Mars is our next step in evolution, that we're naturally trying to develop ways to survive away from the Earth. Anyway, I'd be interested to know what you think, if you feel like sharing your thoughts on that. So just a quick review, add some of these to your list if you haven't already got them. Why is diversity important? Well, just the value of living organisms. I feel quite strongly about that one. Stability of the ecosystems, vitally important for all forms of life, really. The reason we need stability is to have enough food and resources, places to live, medicines, materials for us, for clothes and things, etc. Genetic diversity is an important one for survival of the species. And this idea of ecosystem function, which I think is often overlooked, and I think that's really important, that one. And we shouldn't miss that out as to why diversity is important. It's probably one of the biggest ones. So that brings us to, well, how can we measure how diverse a particular ecosystem or habitat is? So the thing I'm going to get you to have a look at and practice is this idea of measuring species diversity using something known as the Species Diversity Index. Now, I think this probably looks a little bit scary, but it's not. I mean, those of you that are mathematicians or do psychology, sociology, you probably come across things like this before. So it really isn't scary. It's just a case of knowing what the letters mean. So the first one is the small d there is the actual measure that we're looking at. That is the Species Diversity Index that you're going to calculate. The capital N is the total number of all organisms, either that we are looking at in our sample or that is across the whole of the ecosystem. Now, as you can imagine, that number is usually very large if you're looking at the whole ecosystem. So we'd probably look at target organisms, so just look at a set number of species to compare between two different areas. The bottom bit becomes a little bit more interesting. So we've got this symbol there meaning the sum of. Let's see if I can get my pen here. Let's have red. There we go. So this is your sum of there. Okay, great. And the next one along is the idea of, I can't do it. Wait a minute. Done. Are we done? This is Miss not being able to work the technology. Sorry. I can't switch it off. I need you guys here. Oh, am I supposed to press done itself? There we go. I've just learned a little bit. Sorry, you guys. Okay, so the next one along is the small n. I want to use my pen again here. Let's try this again, see if I can do it better this time. We'll use the green one this time. Okay, here we go. So the small n represents the total number of organisms in each species. And you can see here we've got n minus 1. But what you mustn't forget is this n here. Okay. So that N is really important that we don't miss that. Oh, there you go. Look, that was easy. Should have done that better before. So our total equation is this. The total number of all organisms times by the number of organisms minus 1. So if I've got 10 organisms, I would do 10 times 9. This one is the sum of the total number of organisms in each species timed by the total number of organisms minus 1. But this is for each species. So this is for species A. And say in species A we have 10 again. So it'll be 10 times 9 there. But we're going to add that together to the information for species B, which might be, I don't know, 70. So it would be 70 times 69 and so on. So we're going to work with about 6 different species. So just remember that little n there is really important. So you're going to have a go at this. I want you to use the worksheet that I uploaded on Teams for you. And you'll need 2 copies because we're going to compare 2 different habitats. It is a little bit labour intensive, but it's not complicated if you just make sure you know what all the letters mean. And I think the key here is to make sure you just do it a little bit slowly, do it carefully to start with and pay attention to detail so you don't actually accidentally miss out sort of a sum of or one of those kind of things.